I'm assuming this is the clicker. It's an interesting one. I haven't seen that one before. Okay, excuse me. I don't have a watch, so this technology thing, I have to keep my phone here so I can try and keep myself on track. Okay, so what I'm going to be looking at today is rewiring for change. All this talk about change. Does this thing work? Sorry. Oh, there we go. Okay, so neuroscience in the past 10 years has really changed the way that we think about people, about performance, about potential, that Natalie was just mentioning, and also about why change is so hard. As human beings, we find change incredibly hard. So I'm going to be touching on today a little bit about our brain and understanding why change is hard. Some of the influential thinking and research that can help us in terms of rewiring for change. So what can we do to better engage with change? And then just very quickly looking at some practical applications in terms of how this neuroscience is informing how we engage in our people practices in organizations. So this quote is as relevant today as it was when Darwin crafted it all those years ago. In fact, probably more relevant. And it's not just relevant to species, but it's also relevant to organizations and to each of us in terms of our roles in this changing world of work. So if we look at all the change that's happening, we've seen the mega trends, we've heard some of the social implications. How ready for change are each of us? What will we do if our roles change or disappear? How can we ensure that we are around so that we can then move with the change instead of just becoming extinct? So this is a model of the brain by Dr. Evian Gordon, which really is a simplification in terms of how the brain operates. And I find it a very useful way to help us understand why change is difficult. So basically it's called the 1-2-4 model of the brain, because the brain has got one core operating principle, and that is safety first. So our brains are designed to maximize rewards and to minimize threats. It will always put our own safety first. Ultimately, our brains evolved to keep us alive, and that is its primary function, and that's what it does best. Along with that, there are two core processes. So we have non-conscious processes, and we have got conscious processes. And really what enables or pulls those two together, the one and the two, are the four supporting processes, which are emotion. Okay, and emotion is non-conscious. So an emotion is actually just a chemical. It's a neuropeptide. And what happens is that all the stimuli that we take into ourselves, into our brains, we have an emotional reaction to that. Once that emotion passes through into our conscious processes of the brain, that's when it becomes a feeling. And feelings are when we notice what's going on from an emotional perspective. The change in the heart rate, the sweaty palms, the shivering in my body, the shiver in my voice. All of those physiological changes that emotions bring onto the body. And when we can start naming what it is that's going on. Then there are the thinking processes, which is obviously about our ability to plan, to think, to recall. And then finally, it's about self-regulation. So how do we get all of these things to work together in the body? Okay, so with that model in mind, I'm going to just speak to you a little bit about change. So, experiment. Can everybody please cross their arms? Fold your arms. All comfortable? Yeah? Okay, look down at your folded arms, and I'd now like you to fold them the other way. Okay, one or two laughs that I can hear. Comfortable? No. Okay, so why is that? And obviously I'm up here and it's a bit difficult for me to get feedback from you, so I'm going to just talk this through. Ordinarily I would get some input around this. Okay, so if you look down, okay, what you've done is you've changed a pattern. ordinarily you fold your arms pretty much in one way, okay? And it's uncomfortable when I ask you to change. Even a small thing such as folding your arms the other way can be very uncomfortable, and it can be quite difficult. So I'm going to challenge all of you now for the rest of at least my talk. I'd like you to fold your arms the second way. And now imagine if I extend that and I say, now you've got to keep this change. Okay? What's going to happen? Okay, you're going to have to use conscious resources every time you fold your arms. Whereas the first time you folded your arms, you didn't have to think about it. Okay? You just folded your arms. Now you're going to have to actually think about, oh, how am I folding my arms? That's the first thing. The second thing is, you're probably going to look down at some point and realize that you folded your arms about 10 minutes ago. You didn't even notice that you did it, and you did it the first way. Because it's very easy to slip back into our patterns. Okay. So this is really one of the reasons that change is very hard. It's because the brain is a pattern-making machine. If you look at our conscious resources versus our non-conscious resources, and this little analogy here is thanks to David Rock from the Neuroleadership Institute, but the conscious resources of our brain relative to the non-conscious areas of the brain is about 1 cubic foot. For those of you who don't know about cubic feet, I had to go and look it up. It's nearly 40 centimeters, okay, in a cube. Versus the non-conscious areas of the brain, which is equivalent to the Milky Way. So our conscious resources are very, very limited. So in order to reserve our precious conscious resources, which take up lots of energy, our brain converts as much as it can into patterns so that it can be dealt with at the non-conscious level. So our prefrontal cortex, as it says there, the primary use is to understand, decide, recall, to memorize, and importantly also to inhibit. Okay, so I mentioned emotions are a chemical. We use our prefrontal cortex. Once you can actually name what you're feeling, it releases other chemicals, which has the negative effect on the emotional chemicals. So it reduces the emotional chemical. I'm trying not to get too technical here. And inhibiting is a very, very crucial role of the prefrontal cortex. But what happens is that when I ask you to engage in any kind of change, you actually go into a mild threat state, okay? Because your brain does not like to use these precious resources. It wants to keep it for things that are really important. So if I ask you what 1 + 1 is, what is it? 2 + 2. 4 + 4. Okay, no prefrontal cortex. 5,362 times by 157.2. Okay, so you laugh about it. Okay, did anybody actually try it? Okay, that's obviously an exaggerated response. But what happens is as soon as I ask you to do anything that requires your prefrontal cortex, your brain kind of goes, do I really need to do this? Okay, so we go into a mild threat response. And threat responses link to the core organizing principle of the brain, which I said was safety first. Okay, so the brain will do everything to maximize reward and minimize threat. And 5 times every second, your brain is basically scanning and assessing all of the stimuli and input that it receives and classifying it. Is it a potential reward? Is it a potential threat? Or is it no consequence? And what's important here is that what is stronger is the threat. Okay, so if you pick up a threat and let's say it has a value of 1 and a possible reward and it also has a value of 1, the actual response in your brain is disproportionate. You will have a response of 50 to the threat and you will have a response of 1 to the reward. So the brain will run away from threats and it will walk slowly towards rewards. Okay. And this is important because when it comes to change, change is something that the brain will consider to be a threat if it cannot decide if the outcome is going to be a reward or possibly something that can harm it. Make sense? Okay. And what happens when you go into a threat state is you actually get cut off from all of the cortical areas that you need to problem solve, innovate, collaborate, and then all of those functions of the prefrontal cortex: understand, recall, decide, memorize. You get cut off from all of that. And especially if you go into what's known as a primary threat state, the only thing that really goes up is your motor functioning, okay? Because it's getting you ready to fight or flee or possibly freeze. Everything else goes down. So all of your energy is going to the parts of your body that you will need to survive. And you literally get cut off from the other areas of your brain. So often in eyewitness testimonies, you'll hear stories when people are asked to describe the perpetrator. Often they can't. They'll say, but I can describe the gun. Okay, because literally your field of vision narrows. Okay, you focus on the thing that is the threat. You significantly have reduced access to all those parts of your brain that will give you some alternative options and bright ideas to come up with. All you want to do is survive, get out of there, okay? And what's key, as I mentioned, is that uncertainty creates a very, very strong threat response. And with change, there's often a lot of uncertainty. So, first of all, we don't like change because it takes up too much of our precious prefrontal cortex resources. Secondly, if we're not sure what the outcome is going to be, we're going to go into a threat state. Okay. And it's not just physical threats that put us into a threat or reward state. Okay, so in a threat state is known as being in an away state, and in a reward state is being in a toward state. Okay. It's not just physical threats that our brain classifies either as a threat or a reward. Neuroscience has taught us that actually it is true that we are completely social animals. We have circuitry specifically dedicated to being social. And what they've found is when they put people under functional magnetic resonance imaging scanners is that supposedly when we're not doing anything, the active circuits in our brain are our social networks. And things like rejection, exclusion, light up the same areas of the brain as physical pain does. So if I stab you in the leg, or if I reject you or exclude you, either way, your brain thinks you're going to die. Okay? It does not tell the difference between a physical threat and a social threat. And David Rock from the Neuroleadership Institute has classified the 5 social domains that our brains are continuously scanning for rewards and threats from into a beautifully sticky model called the SCARF model. So all of these domains can either activate the reward or the threat responses in our brains. And it could be from mild to a primary threat or reward state. Okay, and so the first is status. Okay, and all of this is relative, okay, because social is relative. So if you think about status, it's going to be about, where do you peg your status? Is it in the grading system in your organization and the hierarchy? Is it in your community? Is it in your family? Is it in your church group? How do you define your status, okay? Certainty. We've already mentioned that uncertainty creates a threat response. The brain hates uncertainty, unpredictability, ambiguity. And if it doesn't have answers, it makes up stories. And in fact, 95% of our lives, we live in what's known as the indirect circuits of the brain, where we live our lives according to the stories that our brains make up. And only 5% do we live in what's known as the direct circuits of the brain, which links to mindfulness. So there's been a lot of interest in mindfulness and mindful awareness. And in fact, if you can practice mindful awareness and mindfulness, you can actually strengthen your prefrontal cortex. And it's a wonderful tool that helps you deal with all of the stresses that we're talking about. Autonomy. Autonomy comprises 2 things. It's about control and power. And really, with all of this change that's going on around us, often we don't have control of the change. In organizational change as well, I might not have control of the restructure or the 189s or whatever's going on. But the second component is power. I do have the power to choose how I'm going to engage with that change, how I'm going to implement the change. If you do not have power and control, it leaves people in a very, very depressed and sticky state. Okay. So power and control are the two elements of autonomy. Relatedness, that is obviously about our relations. And what's key here is that the brain defaults to foe. So if I walk into a room, and it's not, for example, here we already have an idea of who's going to be in the room. So the threat might be a little bit different. But if I walk into a completely unknown area, region, and I look at all the people, my immediate response is going to be foe. Because the brain doesn't know whether you are going to help me or harm me. Are you going to be my friend, or are you out to kill me? So to keep us alive, that is the default state. And what's really, really fascinating here is that, and this is where the whole in-group, out-group phenomenon comes in, is that when they have looked at people's brains, again, under all of the scanners that they use, depending on whether you consider the other person a friend or a foe, when you are listening to somebody, different circuits of the brain light up. So if you're a friend, one circuit will light up. If you're a foe, a different circuit will light up. And that relatedness is crucial. And when you think about it from an organizational perspective, inclusiveness, trust, if you trust your leader, your peers, whoever is leading the organization, when they give you a message, you are going to receive it very differently to if you don't trust them, if you consider them your foe. Okay. And then fairness is very, very subjective. What I consider to be fair will be very different for any one of you. And the way that you can use the SCARF model when it comes to, change, but it's not just change. So it's anything that will activate a threat or reward response in these 5 domains, if you think about it. From an organizational perspective, leaders, by the very fact that they are leaders, trigger a threat response in all of these areas. Okay? I have the status. I'm the boss. I have the certainty. I know what's going on around here. People tell me things they don't tell you. Whether or not that's true is irrelevant, okay? I am going to impact your autonomy. I'm going to tell you what your scope is, what you can do, what you can't do. Relatedness, I hold the power in this relationship, okay? And fairness, I am ultimately going to impact what your rewards are through the decisions that I make and how I treat you compared to other people in the team. So any of those areas, you can either create a threat response in people or you can trigger a reward response in people. Okay, so change is hard because it requires us to use our limited prefrontal cortex, which requires lots of energy. And often uncertainty is associated with change, and that can create a primary threat response. And when we experience a primary threat response, we basically go into fight or flight mode. But it's not just physical threats, okay? So social threats, the brain does not tell the difference between physical threats and social threats. And there are basically the 5 social domains that if a threat is triggered in any of those, it can result in a primary threat. And if you think about all the change that's happening in the world and in organizations, you can have multiple threat responses. So if you're having a major organizational reshuffle, people's status is at threat. Certainty, okay? There's lots of uncertainty. Do I have a job? Don't I? What's my role going to be? Do I have a role? Autonomy. How much power do I have in this situation? How much control do I have in this situation? Relatedness. Okay, things start getting a bit rocky. Can I still trust the people I trusted? And fairness. Why is this happening to me? That typical response. Now, if we have made sure that the first 4 are strong, So particularly from a leadership perspective, if you're ensuring people, that their status, how do you build on status? It's about showing people that you value their input. Okay. So yes, we're going through change, but your input into that change is important. What do you think? What do you feel? What are our options? Certainty. It's about telling people what we know, but also what we don't know. Because if you don't tell people what you don't know, they get suspicious. Okay? So we know that this is the change that's going to happen. What I don't know is what's going to happen to your role or to this department. So what you don't know, you need to express. If you're giving people the power to be part of this change process, then they will feel some sense of control, if not over the decisions that have been made, at least in terms of their own lives. And if you have built strong relationships with them, they are much less likely to go into a threat state and see everything as unfair. Okay. And if you've ever experienced pain, you know that if you've got a throbbing foot, it's very, very difficult to focus on anything else. You might be diverted for a little while, but then that throb is going to come back. And if pain, social pain, lights up the same network as physical pain, that's actually what's happening when we're in a threat state. Is you walk around in this complete fog, you're in an away state, you can't access your creativity, your thinking, your decision-making processes, and then you have all of these multiple threats. And you actually end up with a cycle. So what never used to be a threat before is suddenly a threat now. Okay. Before, if I walked past my manager's office and the door was closed, oh, it was just on an important phone call. Now, if I walk past my manager's office and the door is closed, he's talking about how he's going to get rid of me. Okay, so once you're in that threat state, it's very, very difficult to get out of it because bad is stronger than good. Okay, so we have a disproportionate response. But the good news is that there are actually two responses to change, conflict, or difficulty. And we've spoken a lot about the threat response. That is the default response, okay? Because that is how the brain is designed to keep us alive. But some people approach change or difficulty or conflict as a challenge. Now, when you approach it as a challenge, that is in a toward state. That's when you actually lean in. It might be uncomfortable, but you're curious, okay? Where's this change going? What's going to happen? What are the opportunities? How can I be a part of this change? Either I can go into the threat state and be taken out, or I can move with the change. Okay. And you can think of it as if you go into a threat state, you end up playing not to lose. If you go into the challenge state, you end up playing to win. And those are two very, very different approaches. The one results in distress. The other results in eustress, which is positive stress, which if any of you are familiar with the performance curve, when you go into that state of flow, or what's known as being in the zone, that's when you're experiencing just the right amount of stress that can really drive your performance and your productivity. And that's ultimately the kind of stress that we want our employees to be in, not in distress. We want eustress. Okay, so how can we actually change the way that we typically deal with change or difficulty or conflict? One of the greatest predictors of whether you're going to typically respond as a threat or challenge comes from growth mindset. Growth mindset is the work of Carol Dweck, and this work is currently one of the key pieces of research that many organizations are using to change their philosophical approach to talent and potential and people. Okay. So what growth mindset is all about is that our beliefs, our personal beliefs about human beings and about ourselves and our ability to grow and change and develop fundamentally impacts our ability to change and grow and develop and succeed. Okay. So traditionally, many of us were taught that IQ is fixed, right? Yeah? Okay. We were taught that our characters were fixed. Okay? If your personality is, if you're a grumpy old thing, by the time your brain is fully formed at age 24, well, then you're just going to be a grumpy old thing for the rest of your life. Okay? And by the time you get to 24 and your brain is fully formed, well, then it's all downhill from there. actually, neuroplasticity, the brain's ability to change itself, carries on until death. So previously, where we thought that only children's brains were malleable and plastic and could change, is a myth. We all have the ability to change our brains up until the time that we die. And in fact, we continue to grow new neurons. And especially a lot of research has been done around the hippocampus area of the brain. We actually generate new neurons, which before they thought never happened in the brain. And you need to also separate out your brain from your mind. Your brain, in a sense, is the hardware, and your mind is the software. Okay? Your brain is formed by your mind. Okay? What you focus on is what rewires your brain structurally. So there's that Hebb's law, neurons that fire together wire together. If you are focusing on negative things, life is difficult, woe is me, okay? All the problems, that is what gets hardwired in the brain. If you're focusing on talent is talent, people can't change. Not everyone has potential, okay? Some have it, some don't. That is what you hardwire for yourself. But if you can use your intention to focus your attention of your mind, you can actually change your brain structure so that it then becomes automatic processing as opposed to having to consciously, practice makes progress. So that's fixed mindset. Okay, the typical saying is practice makes perfect. There is no perfect in growth mindset. Okay, it's about how do we practice and change and grow and develop. And from an organizational perspective, this has a huge impact in terms of how we manage people and talent. It means that we need to focus less on talent and more on our ability to learn at every level in the organization. Yes, we all have got different starting points and influences and education, but from whatever base we start, everybody has the potential to grow and improve. So growth mindset is really about reframing our thoughts, okay? And when you go into a difficult situation, hello? When you go into a difficult situation, it's about reframing, am I seeing this as a threat or is this a challenge? Can I learn from this? Is this something I can change and adapt to this? I have the ability. Okay, so, and in order to recognize, what are our thought patterns and to be able to reframe, we need to start becoming conscious of those voices in our heads. Okay. So emotional intelligence is a critical skill that we need. We've needed it forever, but particularly in this day and age with increasing complexity and stress. And what's key is that, is that our thoughts, our feelings, and our actions are completely intertwined. So if you want to start noticing how you typically respond in challenging situations or conflict, I encourage you just to pick a recent situation that didn't work out as planned, okay? And then think about it as it was happening. What were the thoughts that were running through your head? Okay? What were you feeling? And what were you doing? Act is the physical action, but it's also about all the physical reactions that are going on in your body. And then what was the outcome? And then if you have a look at what you were thinking, what you were feeling, and what was going on for you physically, test for yourself, is that a pattern? When X happens, I typically go into this pattern of thoughts, feelings, and actions. And then if you want to rewire for change, if you want to change the pattern, you don't have to change all three. Because what I think changes what I feel and what goes on for me physiologically and the actions I take. What I do changes what I feel and what I think. And what I feel changes what I think and what I do. So if you want to change a pattern, pick the thing that's easiest for you to change. Is it a thought? Is it what you feel? Is it what you're doing? And then next time you notice yourself going into this pattern, you need to consciously reframe and replace that thing for yourself. Okay? So if my thought originally was, oh, stupid idiot, just doesn't know what they're doing, just hopeless, forever coming to me and asking for help. And the feeling I get is irritation and frustration and a little bit of anger. Okay, and what I do is I help them, but, it's really just done in a way that's just to get them out of my hair, okay? If I changed my thought next time that person came to me and said, well, actually, maybe this person really is looking for some help and some guidance, and maybe they really are stuck. Just by changing that thought, what will my feelings and what will my actions change to? My action might stay the same. I still help the person. But qualitatively, it's going to be very different. The way in which I go about helping the person and my thoughts and feelings that are associated with that are very different. And what we need to do is we need to start shifting away from our reactions. Okay, so that threat response, when we get cut off from the prefrontal cortex, often that's when we have what's known as an amygdala hijack. Okay, so somebody pushes a button, you say something, 20 minutes to an hour later, you go, I can't believe I said that. Okay? It's because we are reacting, and typically we use a patterned response. And what you need to do is you need to learn to take a 6-second pause. So the emotional chemical takes 6 seconds to flood your body before it emerges into consciousness and we start interacting with it as a feeling. So when you start feeling something, take a 6-second pause. And when you take that 6-second pause, don't focus on the problem because you're hardwiring it. Okay? You actually need to divert your attention. You need to think of the first line of the first 6 songs of the 10,000 songs that you downloaded off that USB. Okay? You need to work out the square root of some ridiculous number. And a very powerful way to take a pause is to use breath and breathing. That's what I use. Okay? You can actually use your breathing to change the whole coherence of your body. So take a pause. And then once you start interacting with it, recognize, what am I feeling? Is this a pattern? If you name what you're feeling, your prefrontal cortex will release inhibitors, which will reduce the potency of the emotional response. And then you can choose to replace that thought, that feeling, or that action. Okay. So whether that is a response to change, to conflict, to any situation, if you can start being more conscious of it, recognizing your patterns, and then consciously being aware of what it is you can do to change them. And you don't have to change it all, just pick one thing. Okay.
Whoa, that's not good.
Oh, I don't need this. I'm already late.
Somebody will come. Anybody out there?
Do you have a phone?
No. Sorry.
Please, can you turn the sound up?
Somebody! Hello? There are 2 people stuck on an escalator and we need help. Now, would somebody please do something?
Help! Help! Help!
I don't believe this. You gotta be kidding me.
I'm gonna cry.
Well, there's not enough left to do, is there?
Hello? Hey, don't worry about it. I'll fix it in a second.
He said he can fix it. All right. All right. That's more like it. He says he can fix it.
Walking down the sidewalk, kicking my feet as I'm moving to the music. Step to the beat. I woke up today, canceled all my plans, and I stayed.
Are they stuck? They are. Can they see the options? Okay, so from your brain's perspective, if you're stuck, you're stuck. and you can't see the options. Because if you go into that threat state, remember, you can't access all of those parts of the brains that help you see the bigger picture, literally and actually physically. And what's the other word I'm looking for? Jeremy can help you with my words later. Okay, so you can't actually access the bigger picture. You can't necessarily see the options. But the first step, if you really feel stuck, is to say to yourself, I have a choice. Even if you don't know what the options are yet, just by acknowledging that you have a choice will immediately put you in a slightly more toward state, which means that slowly you'll start to access the parts of the brain that you need to be able to see what the options are. One of the most powerful tools that enables us to see options is optimism. And optimism is a way of seeing the world, okay? We don't like labels, so it's not you're optimistic or you're pessimistic, because that's fixed mindset, right? Okay? You either have a tendency towards an optimistic point of view or a tendency towards a pessimistic point of view, purely because that's what you've hardwired into your brain. So when you start recognizing patterns, you need to start noticing your self-talk. Do you go into fixed mindset talk? Do you go into, in this model, what's known as PPP talk? So when something goes wrong, okay, you didn't get the promotion. So now it's permanent. Oh, okay, I'm never going to get promoted. It's pervasive. And in fact, it's not just this promotion. Nothing in my life, I'm never going to actually progress anywhere in my life. I can just see it. I'm going to be stuck here forever. And I'm powerless. Okay? And it's not in my control. There's nothing I can do to change the situation. That is a typical pessimistic point of view. Whereas the optimistic point of view is that this is temporary. Okay, so I didn't get the promotion this time. Okay? It's isolated. It's one thing in my life. It's one promotion in my life. If I look at the rest of my life, I've got amazing relationships. You know, I have wonderful standing in my community, whatever else I work on. And effort is possible. If I put some effort into it, if I understand maybe why I didn't get the promotion this time, what can I do to change the outcome next time? And if I really can't change the outcome, what are my other options? So if I really do go and do the homework and identify that in this organization I'm not necessarily going to progress, what are my other options? I can refocus, okay, and what can I learn from this? So you can use this model to reframe your thinking. Notice when something happens, if you're going into PPP talk, reframe it to tie. It's temporary, it's isolated, and with effort I can impact the situation. The interesting thing is that when good things happen, this model flips. Okay, so the pessimistic point of view, I win the lotto, right? Pessimistic point of view, this is temporary, okay? It's a glitch in the matrix. Things like this never happen to me. It's isolated. It's just the lotto. Everything else sucks in my life, right? And there's no effort possible. It doesn't matter, you know, I could try this again. It's not going to change it. Versus the optimistic point of view would be, this is permanent. I keep winning things. Everything in my life is just going amazingly well. Okay, and it's everything in my life. It's not just the lotto. You know, good things happen to me all the time. And it's about the things that I attract to myself. It's my personal power. Okay, so it switches. So again, notice when good things happen, do you go into tie talk? If you do, how can you switch it to PPP? And from an organizational perspective, optimism is critical. So this is also about if you're going through a tough time, you need to frame it for employees in a tie approach. It's temporary. Okay? It might be a year, it might be 5 years. It doesn't matter the duration. It's still temporary. Okay? It's isolated, and what is the effort that we need to take to impact this? So we can use this in our organizational communication as well, and when we are mentoring and coaching staff to help them to see their options. Okay. And then very quickly, I'm not going to go into this in detail. I did a talk at the SARA conference in 2013 called More Than Money, the 4 Drives. So if you're interested in 4-drive theory, you can go and have a look at that. But it's what all the neuroscience is teaching us is that we really need to tap into people's intrinsic motivation. And when we're talking about threat and rewards, rewards does not equal motivation. Rewards does also not equal money. Okay. Our motivation is to maximize rewards and minimize threats. And rewards are all of the things that are listed there, is that we have a need to acquire. Yes, money, but also stuff, status, children, spouses, houses, all of the things that we want to acquire. We have an innate need to bond. We want mutually caring, beneficial relationships with people. We have a desire to comprehend and create and learn, which is linked to growth mindset, and it's linked to autonomy, mastery, and purpose. And we have a need to defend all of those things. So that's where the threat comes in, okay? I want to defend my status and my stuff and everything I've acquired. I want to defend my relationships and the groups that I've identified with and the bonds that I've made. And I want to defend my legacy and all the things that I'm creating. And if we just focus on extrinsic rewards, you can actually put people into a threat state. So even money, if it's done incorrectly, or if you put people into an over-motivation drive, if people don't have the skill and the knowledge and the tools to perform, a very high incentive can actually reduce performance. And in fact, if you look at base pay and pay for performance, base pay is kind of a given. You need to pay people enough to take the issue of money off the table. Pay for performance, if it's expected, loses its motivational effect. Okay? So once I start expecting it, it no longer becomes motivational. The key with rewards is that it needs to be unexpected. Okay. And in reward here, we talk about recognition, we talk about wellness, we talk about bonding, coaching, relatedness, all of the SCARF things. So it's critical that we don't focus everything on the money. It's about how do we build organizations that enable people to build on those SCARF elements, really, which also fits into this model. So finally, in terms of this, we need to ensure that when we design people practices and change initiatives, that we do it with the brain in mind. Okay. So if we know that people have a typical threat response to change, what can we do to help shift them into a more toward state so that they can access the parts of the brain that we need them to collaborate, to co-create this future amongst all of this unpredictability and uncertainty and change? And some of the applications where we're seeing neuroscience being used is in leadership. So the critical role of emotional intelligence that I already mentioned, okay? Empathy is one of the key traits that, especially in this world of technology, in this changing world, that we need from a leadership perspective. So leadership capability and competence, emotional intelligence, coaching, conversational skills. Do I put my people in an away state, or do I put them in a toward state? Okay. Performance management. We have a panel a little bit later. We are seeing huge shifts in performance management. A lot of the traditional practices which are on the left-hand side, it's about judging. It's about annually we set a goal, and then at the end of the year we look back and we judge you. How did you do on that goal? And then we label you, okay? Which is fixed mindset as well. We label you. We give you a rating, 1, 2, 3, 4, or 5. Once I've labeled you a 3, if a 5 opportunity comes up, I'm not going to give you that opportunity because you're a 3. Okay? And also, if I'm a 3, I'm always going to be a 3. Why am I going to try and achieve what a 5 needs to achieve? Because it's impossible. Okay? So it's about performance scores and forced rankings. It's about a competitive assessment. I am going to compare you to your colleague. Okay, so you did this and they did Y. It's about paying for performance, that direct link to performance. Okay, so that rating is going to determine what you're going to get paid. It's top-down, lots of paperwork, admin. We're seeing a shift to the other side. Okay, a lot of those practices on the left put people in threat states. How many of you love your annual review? Leave you motivated? No? Okay, I don't see too many people jumping around. Okay, so it's shifting to all of the things that I've spoken about. It's about coaching approaches. It's about enabling people to improve the quality of their own thinking, come up with their own solutions. It's about outcomes, goal setting, at shorter cycles where we then give people the freedom to come up with how are they going to go about achieving it. It's about moving away from the ratings and the rankings and the reviews to ongoing conversations and guidance. Are you on track or off track? What do you need to ensure that by the time we achieve the end of this goal cycle that you achieve the goals? It's about less of a direct link between pay and performance and taking other things into account. So contribution, obviously market value, all of those sorts of things, but how can we loosen that link between the two? It's about real-time systems that allow us to have an ongoing conversation. It's about reducing the time we spend on admin and increasing the face time that we have with people. And aside from performance management, learning and development, so we know a lot about how the brain learns. Your typical traditional one-day classroom activity, shifting more to the 70-20-10 approach. 70% on the job, ongoing coaching, mentoring. So looking at different ways that we need to enable people to learn. Growth mindset is also linked to this, so it's a continual learning process. And it's also about small chunks of information, high frequency, with intervals where people actually have time to absorb it and put it into practice. Workplace culture. You know, if you just have a look around at your norms and your practices and the artifacts of that, the policies and everything, you know, are they aligned with brain-friendly practices, or are they putting people into threat states? And then change management. I've mentioned, you know, we often, when you look at all the stats, you've heard them all, change management fails 70% of the time. Many of the change models do not take the human factor into account. And emotions drive people, people drive performance. We have to bring the people along, and we can use this fantastic information and knowledge that neuroscience is providing us to create brain-friendly environments in which people and organizations can thrive despite all the chaos and the change. Thanks.